Good afternoon, everyone. I am Lori Chenault, our leader of sourcing and procurement here at Georgia Pacific. I'd like to welcome everyone here in Atlanta and those online to our program. I'll tell you, it feels good to be back in the auditorium here in GP and to have an audience. So thank you for all those that came down to join us. It's been almost 3 years since we kicked off our conversation series about major societal topics that affect all of us. I'm really proud to work for a company that fosters an environment for us to have these conversations that are important to each of us and to provide an environment for us to do our best. It's exciting that we've maintained our momentum, and this is our 10th conversation in our series. We've covered critical topics from criminal justice reform to anti-human trafficking, opioid addiction, unconscious biases, and mental health awareness. And today, we're here to talk about another very important topic, caregiver support. The purpose of this conversation is to begin a dialogue on topics that some of us find difficult or uncomfortable because, frankly, they're personal. I agreed to host this conversation because I personally think it's important, and I know it impacts so many of us in our GP family. You know, along my journey here at GP for 25 years, I've met many of you who are working parents, or at times taking care of ill family members or aging parents. That makes us all caregivers. You know, I understand that it can be very challenging to balance work and that thing called life. But those that have been around me often hear me talk about the art of balancing the work-life integration because they really don't separate. And even with my college kids who are not at home and my dad in Virginia, this still applies to me. In fact, before this, I had to remind my kids, don't call until after 2 o'clock because I can't answer the phone. So whether I'm adjusting to the needs of one of my children or supporting my father, there seems to be situations in my life that have required special attention. A recent event for me, in fact, in 2018, right in the middle of digital core with consumer products, and it was in the fall where we're working on strategies in IT for the upcoming year, my mother suddenly became ill and passed away after a very brief illness. She and my father were living in Richmond, and of course I'm here in Atlanta. And like many of you, I tried to manage the remote support and the telephone calls after the main part of the workday or between meetings or during lunch. And soon after a few weeks of those calls, I realized I needed to make a trip to Richmond. So I too was faced with, I need to talk to my supervisor. And at the time, that supervisor was Steve Clancy. And so as I approached Steve, I said, Steve, I need to make a trip to Richmond. His first response was, what can I do? And what help do you need? That conversation was so comforting, and it made me really feel at ease. It was like a weight had been lifted that I'd had this conversation with my supervisor. So I share this story with you so you are encouraged to think about having that conversation with your leader. You know, as colleagues and supervisors, we should all be aware of signs that people may be going through something and they too could use the support or resources. In our vision, we talk about investing in our employees, enabling employees to contribute and foster self-actualization. This is only achievable when our needs are met, including psychological needs. Mental wellness improves the likelihood that we will contribute to our fullest and feel good about our lives and our work. So today, we want to share with you resources and, more importantly, help you feel that you are not alone. We're here to help navigate this subject with you and reduce the stigma and provide support. Let me share with you a statistic. 1 in 3 employee caregivers say their supervisors aren't even aware that they're in a caregiver situation. 1 in 3. And so what does that mean? That team member is more likely to experience stress, absenteeism, and health problems. We hope today that we can change that statistic here at GP. So we have several guests that we've invited to share with you some tips on navigating being a caregiver. But before we hear from our panelists, let's watch a video from one of our partners, Jonah Beach.
In the summer of 2018, I became the primary caregiver for both of my folks as we navigated my dad's early onset dementia, heart issues, and then my mom with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I was very upfront with all of my bosses in regards to, this is what I'm up against, this is what I'm dealing with, staff is going to be amazing, and I'll let you know if there's any changes, and then I would just update them as we went through. As a caregiver, first and foremost, advocate for the patient and advocate for yourself. I had a list of menial tasks that somebody can do when they offer to help. Anything that would pull me away from my folks, we put on that list. My mom had her will, she had her power of attorney, she had her medical plan lined out. It was such a great benefit that my mom had everything in order beforehand.
Okay, so let me introduce our panelists for today. Okay, first we have Elizabeth Miller. She's a SUPPORTLINC partner, and the name of her business is Happy Healthy Caregiver. She's an expert in caregiving space, and she's had experience caring for aging parents and a brother with developmental disabilities. Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, then we have Victor Dennis. We have Victor, who's a proud dad. Yeah.
Yes.
And he's a co-talent solutions leader, and today he's going to share with us how he's managed to be a caregiver while managing the busy aspects of his job. Okay. And then thirdly, Gina Micalizio is also a SUPPORTLINC partner. She's an estate planning attorney with over 20 years of experience helping families navigate sometimes a very confusing and complex topic and the challenges that life has thrown their way. Welcome. And finally, Elizabeth Clubb. She's the owner of My Flock. Isn't that a cool name, My Flock? She's a health care, wellness, and aging expert with a passion for helping families navigate financial matters. Okay.
Great to be here.
Well, thank you. Okay, so we'll get started with our panelists. I have a few questions, and then we will certainly open it up to those online and here in the auditorium with us. So with that, we'll get started. So my first question will go to you, Elizabeth. Okay. Tell us about the types of services SUPPORTLINC offers to our employees.
Oh, great question. So first of all, I want to thank Georgia Pacific for putting this event together because I think it just speaks volumes that you feel that this is important. SUPPORTLINC is your employee assistance program here at GP, and they have a lot to offer y'all. One of the things that I didn't know as an employee when I was working in caregiving is that some of the things that they could do. I wish that my manager had mentioned that to me, or maybe I could have sought that out through HR. So even if you're not a caregiver, if you're a leader in this organization, I think it's important that you know what we have to offer. So SUPPORTLINC can help you with work-life balance stuff. So they can help you research senior care organizations or childhood organizations that are going to help you with your dependent care. They also offer legal and financial services that you can reach out to them and explore what that is, and a lot of them offer some great discounts there as well. They also have short-term counseling. So short-term counseling could be for any kind of topic, and anyone in your household that's of any age, and then age 26 even and under, if they're not in your house, can use the services. You could use it for grief and loss, you could use it for relationships, you can use it for depression or addiction, whatever your topic is, short-term counseling, they'll make a referral. And then last but not least, I would say there's a rich portal of information for caregivers, webinars, articles, and videos. So check it out.
Awesome, lots of resources available. Victor, question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, tell us how you communicated with your supervisor when you were experiencing a challenging time.
I think in the beginning, my supervisor was Charles Jackson, and I've been on this caregiver journey since 2014. We had a good relationship. We talked about work, part of our discussions around R&Es, and we talked about family. He had his son play sport and talked about our kids. But when my wife started having some medical issues, I shared with him some of the undiagnosed medical conditions we were going through in the beginning, I really didn't get into a lot of details. I just kind of surfaced, say my wife is going through something. And, he asked the same thing, do you need any support, Victor, as you're going through this? And I said at the time, no. And that kind of the macho feel, I got this is my family, I can take care of this. As time went on and things started to happen, I felt overwhelmed, the stress. And he could see that, and he just said, hey, Vic, let's talk for a second. We went out for lunch, and he said, hey, tell me, how are you feeling? I know about your wife, but how are you feeling? And same thing, that was kind of like the balloon burst, and I could, kind of share that. But it took him noticing me to say, hey, something about Victor, he's not smiling, he doesn't have that smile. He noticed something. So that was kind of my first part of sharing it with him.
Yeah, and these conversations are always so tough because they're personal,
Yes.
right? And we all try to manage it ourselves and think we don't want to disrupt work. And some of us think we don't want to bother anybody else, right? We walk around and say, well, I don't need to be a bother because everybody's dealing with their own things. But as you share that story, can you give us some advice of how you have this tough conversation or how you start this conversation with your supervisor?
I think for me, it was the start of that conversation came with our relationship as supervisor-employee. We would talk about things other than work during the day to kind of break up the monotony, sports, whatever, but it was that comfort I felt that I could go to him for conversations. Now, when it got really personal, I think the small steps of having that conversation, sharing things, and then, of course, he asked some open-ended questions and sharing some resources, but I think for me it was being vulnerable. I think that's the biggest. I had to put myself in a place where I could be vulnerable to, share my feelings and what was happening.
Okay, Elizabeth Miller, I'm coming to you, ladies, I promise. Okay, a question for you, okay? You've worked a full-time job while raising 2 active children. I can relate to that, okay? And you're helping family caregivers and being a family caregiver yourself. So you're balancing a lot of things, right? Tell us what resources you found most helpful while you were trying to do all of this.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I didn't know about the Employee Assistance Program. I think I said that in the first, but that is a good resource. What helped me at first was really nothing. I felt like Victor at first. I felt like overwhelmed, isolated. I was the only one kind of going through this in my circle of friends. Probably a lot of you can relate. I think it wasn't until I connected to the role of being a family caregiver that doors started really opening up for me. So I want to encourage the people that are listening and the leadership team that's listening to embrace that role. And you are a family caregiver if you are calling someone to remind them of their meds, or you're picking up groceries, or listening to their doctor's appointments, and you could be across the country or down the street. Once I realized I was a caregiver, the first helpful support for me was my mom lived nearby in an assisted living community, and I saw a little note card for a support group. And I thought, I need this. So I went, and I was very vulnerable. I just bursted with vulnerability. And the woman, I remember her name was Dawn, and she really connected me to setting boundaries and managing expectations with my mom, and she gave me tools. And I think that's where I want to encourage people to connect with a local support group, because it's the people who are in the trenches that are gonna give you the resources that are there in your local community, and you're gonna get some great advice from them. And how do you find that? You Google it, and you say, family caregiver support in name of your town or your city, and see what comes up.
There you go. Well, good. Elizabeth.
Yes, ma'am.
And the other Elizabeth. I have a question for you as we talk about all the aspects of caregiving. We know there are many aspects of caregiving, as Elizabeth just talked us through. Can you talk about some of the stresses and challenges around financial caregiving?
Yes, I can. Having been a financial caregiver for my father, and it's interesting because talk about hard conversations. People don't like to talk about money. And actually 92% of caregivers are financial caregivers, but they don't know it. And I don't know if Elizabeth mentioned it or not, but most people who are caregivers don't call themselves caregivers, they call themselves sons and daughters. And so they don't know necessarily, really, to reach out for resources, right? And it's
Mom and dad.
right, or mom and dad. Yeah, exactly. But you don't think of yourself that way. You just do what you do for family. And it's really important on the financial caregiving side and all caregiving side is this is new territory for a lot of people. And there's no like, this is what's going to happen when you get older and your parents are getting older. And so reaching out for resources is really important. One of the things on the financial caregiving side is it can go really badly if you don't have those conversations. So a lot of people are contributing to care. Nobody likes to talk about money. It's very personal. It's very, depends on how family manages money over generations. I mean, there's a whole lot of complexity, right? But elder fraud is a huge problem. It's a $37+ billion a year problem. And so what happens if you don't talk about it is sometimes it's too late. So having those conversations earlier is really important. And the stress, I was a financial caregiver for my dad remotely, and it's very stressful because I never knew what was going to happen. He was in New York, I was here. My goal was to keep him healthy, and I didn't know what was going on in his financial world until the end of every month. We were lucky, but it's super stressful and you're trying to work at the same time. So reaching out early, having conversations early, and having family conversations about money is really important.
Yeah, any advice on how do you have those conversations, or what's some starters to get those conversations going?
Yeah, it's so important if you can to have them as early as possible before you have to have them, because it depends on your family, but normalizing conversations about money early is really critical, and not thinking it's going to be one conversation. So a lot of people get up their gusto and they're like, we're going to have the talk and that's going to be it. And their parents say, get out of my face, because this is right. I mean, because it's a very dramatic thing, and sort of normalizing the conversations to say, let's talk about it sooner rather than later. We want to support you in whatever way you want to be supported, but being able to talk about it, because older adults, as cognition changes, and even without cognitive decline, your financial acumen changes. And so your financial acumen changes, but your confidence about your financial decision doesn't. And that's the problem. So bad decisions can be made, and it's just the brain. The brain changes the way it works. And so talking about that sooner, before it happens, to say, how are we going to talk about it when it's time to talk about it, is a really good idea.
Okay. Gina, another topic that people have a tough time discussing is estate planning, right? Because when people start to think about a estate, then you start to say, well, you have an estate because something has happened, right? And so tell us the importance of estate planning and some few things we must do to recommend for our families.
Well, that's a good point. Estate planning is not just for the elderly or for individuals that are starting to have problems. It's for your contemporaries as well. For example, if you want to ensure who gets what when you pass, you definitely need a will to just firm it up. In addition, what people don't realize is, God forbid something happens and you have minor children that are left with no parents, who is going to be their guardian? And that's the person that would obtain physical custody of the children, and who would be their trustee? Because you don't want to let a 10-year-old inherit $300,000 with no parachute. So I have a lot of young families come to see me who have children, and we make sure that a guardian is appointed and a trustee is appointed. And the trustee has the ability to dole out money for food, clothing, shelter, and education until that child achieves whatever age you request in the will for them to receive the principal. 25, 28. I had a client once that said 45 because she didn't trust her son, but I think that might be a little excessive. And if you don't have a will, what'll happen is every state has a set of laws for descent and distribution. So if you die intestate, which means you die without a will, there's a chart that says who's going to get what. So, and I've had several intestate probate cases this year, and it may not be the result that the decedent would have wanted, but if there is no will, we have to go by the statutes to determine who will receive their assets. And the other important things you have to have an estate plan, and we saw this on the video, is a durable financial power of attorney and an advance directive, which is a medical power of attorney. I don't know if you want me to discuss that.
So go ahead and tell us
Okay.
what an advance directive is.
Okay, an advance directive is two things. It's a medical power of attorney and it's a living will. The medical power of attorney part, you will appoint an agent who's going to be able to admit you to the hospital, discharge you from the hospital, talk to the doctors freely, and see your medical records, and also make decisions for you when you can't. And by that, I mean if you're on pain meds, you're unconscious, and you're just not, and you just don't have the ability to be cognizant of the situation. The other part of the living will is, of the advance directive is the living will. This is the infamous pull the plug. So if you're in the vegetative state, you're doing this in advance. That's why it's called an advance directive. And a vegetative state means, a lot of my clients get concerned about that. What if I'm in a coma? No, we're not talking a coma. We are talking brain dead, no chance for survival at all, or survival as we know it. You know, your existence will be in a hospital bed hooked up to machines and, ventilators and intravenous tubes for food and nutrition the rest of your life. And if that's the case, how do you want things to go? Do you want your natural death to occur and be unplugged? Or do you want to continue to be hooked up to these machines that are not going to have you come back? So basically, you are making that decision in advance. And it takes the pressure off the families, because if someone becomes in the vegetative state, I can assure you the larger the family is, the more difference of opinion there are going to be regarding what the family should do in the situation. So it takes the pressure off the family.
So as you talk to us about an advance directive, you also mentioned something, a power of attorney.
Oh, that's separate.
Help
The other
us
is,
understand the difference, and do we need both?
yes, a durable financial power of attorney is the other item that we recommend for an estate plan. And that gives, you appoint an agent in the durable financial power of attorney, and it gives that individual the ability to really make any financial decision which you can on your own. And this is especially helpful when you have maybe a parent that's showing signs of dementia or Alzheimer's. You don't want that person making financial decisions. You don't want that person going to the bank and doing things with their money that they shouldn't be doing. And it gives you as the agent the ability to handle their affairs. And we call it a durable power of attorney because it survives a person's incapacity. So if you make out this durable power of attorney when you are just fine and you don't have any mental conditions, if you later on down the road do develop dementia, it survives that incapacity and it's still a valid document. But it does die when you pass on. So when you are deceased, that power of attorney cannot be used anymore to access bank accounts, et cetera.
That was a lesson I learned the hard way, because there's a lot of expenses when someone passes away, with the different plots and stuff. So it's a prudent idea that when you kind of see the end coming, to maybe put some money aside for some of those immediate expenses, because it takes a minute for all of that stuff to iron out.
Right.
And for me, I was taking care of my mother-in-law before she passed away with cancer. So I had my wife and my mother-in-law, and both early on were very independent. So having that conversation was difficult. And we put her in to stay with us as she was going through her care. They would, kind of help each other, consoling, but that conversation was very difficult. And getting the wills, power of attorneys, those things in place, it was multiple conversations until they felt comfortable. Yeah. My mother-in-law, until she felt comfortable. Once she was comfortable, that changed. But again, it was difficult in the beginning.
I think part of how to have the conversation is you have to become a really good listener, because it's a very personal conversation for you, but it's even more personal for in your mother-in-law, and being a really good listener and responding and understanding what she's going through, and not trying to push through. When there's sort of danger, or you feel she's uncomfortable, just stop it and then start it again later, because it's a very personal, hard thing to do. And you are a superhero in my mind, so just want to let you know that. Yes. Yeah.
Still learning.
Yeah.
Gina, you talked about the advance directive and the power of attorney and a will. When I think about the advance directive and the power of attorney, anything that they don't do, right? Anything that we need to keep in mind that it doesn't cover?
Well, I want to speak to the advance directive. An advance directive does not include a do not resuscitate order, which is commonly referred to as a DNR. That is not included in an advance directive. That is a separate document that if you didn't want to be resuscitated for whatever reason, the doctor will put it in the file in the hospital so that the hospital staff knows what to do at that point. And a lot of people get confused with the do not resuscitate. And if you didn't have a do not resuscitate order, but you had the advance directive and something happened and you stopped breathing, or you went into cardiac arrest, the medical community is obligated to resuscitate if there's no instruction otherwise given.
Okay, that's good to know.
Just on the do not resuscitate, if you're in that situation, don't just leave it at the hospital, because you have to have it in the home as well. If something happens, the people who come to care are obligated to try to resuscitate. If they don't, they're not going to know the do not resuscitate is there. So you have to have it displayed.
Where should people keep these important documents?
The DNR, we taped it to the back of the door so
Yep.
that if something,
Yep. Think of an ambulance person running in. They're not going to say, "Can I see your files?" Right? You have to have it in. You have to display it. Feels a little awkward, but it's really important. It's really important, and you can also get bracelets as well.
Okay, good. Victor, another question for you.
Yes, ma'am. Send it.
As a leader in our organization, what tips can you offer employees who might find themselves working full-time and caregiving for a loved one?
Okay. As a leader, I would say one thing is, whether it's an employee, a peer, or a coworker, is be attentive. You've got to kind of look at some cues if the behavior is a little different, to at least stop, ask to have a conversation if they feel comfortable, to have them to kind of express what they're going through. I would, as a leader and going through that experience myself, depression, when someone has depression, what does that look like? When someone is withdrawn, you've got to know some of those cues to know when your employee, peer, coworker is doing something kind of a little bit out of the norm, like you mentioned, absenteeism, or stressful, where someone's normally pretty calm in a session and they have these outbursts. That's a change in behavior. So I think as a leader, we've got to be kind of key to that. And we know that work can be stress, and again, what you do at home as a caregiver, so it never turns off. There's not an off button. And as a caregiver, that's 24/7 for the patient. So you've got to be able to say, okay, as an employee, I see my employee sending emails at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. That's out of the norm. Like, what's going on? Why are you up? Having that conversation. So I know it's a difficult conversation to engage, but man, we've got to be okay with the uncomfortable to get to the truth. And I think as a leader, we've got to, have the courage to say, hey, listen, something just doesn't feel right, but you mind talking to me for a few minutes? And hopefully they can open up and get the resources. And as leaders, we need to know these resources to be able to share with them so they can get the help they need.
I think one of the things, to your point, Victor, about working and caregiving is people are sort of masters of their role at work, and they feel a mastery of whatever their profession is. you don't know mastery of caregiving. It's really hard, and it changes, right? You think you've got it, and then it changes. So I think it's hard to say, I don't know what I'm doing and I need help. And I think that's the wonderful thing about having these resources that are available. To learn the role and learn what resources are there is so important, and reach out and say, I need help figuring this out.
Just being the role of a caregiver, I never gave myself that title. I was,
Got the title.
yeah, I was just a husband, and
earned it.
yeah, I'm like, am I
You
a
get your
caregiver?
master's in caregiving, someone told me. That
Yeah.
We're all getting our master's in caregiving.
Yeah.
Yeah, and things can change so quickly, right? One situation, I mean, I reflect on my situation. We went from, hey, mom's just going to a few doctor appointments to, oh my gosh, we're putting her in hospice. So it's like, how do we get there overnight, you know? And as a caregiver, it's a whirlwind, right? It's a whirlwind. So having a support system is so critical that I don't think people realize, and we do hope today that people connect with, you're not alone. But as Victor shared, as leaders too, we have to take some of that responsibility and make it easy, make the environment and the conversation a lot easier for our team members. Okay, before we go to the audience or to those online for questions, I have one, we'll call it the fast round. For our panelists, here's a surprise. They didn't know I was going to do this. What's the one tip that you would give people listening as a caregiver and a working employee of Georgia Pacific? What's the one tip you give them?
Take care of yourself. I mean, take care of yourself so you don't burn out, because who's going to take care of these people if you burn out?
Okay.
Find that one time where you can decompress. It doesn't have to be over a weekend or overnight stay. It could be just as simple as putting on your music while you're washing dishes, or taking the trash out, taking the long route. That's how you kind of decompress while not being disconnected. So you got to find that wherever you can.
For me, it's making sure that estate plan is in place. Most definitely. I'll just give you a personal example. I did not do my parents' estate plan because I did not want to have any conflict of interest. And there was an advance directive that was unsigned by my father. And when he was in the hospital with a stroke, the doctors would not talk to my brother or myself. And I had to drag my almost 90-year-old mother to the hospital every day because it was the only person he would talk to. And that's how serious the medical community is about having that advance directive. So I learned it the hard way.
I have two.
Okay,
Sorry.
we'll take two.
Okay. I think the first is find joy, because there's a ton of joy in this, whatever time of your life it is, there's a ton of joy and gratitude and all of those things. But I think the other thing is find the courage to reach out and talk to your friends and your colleagues, because everyone's going through it. And when you have the courage to talk about it like you do, other people can talk about it as well. I think that's really important, because it is easier together.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, we are going to open it up for questions. So for those that are online, you can email your question to hrcommunications@gapac.com. We have someone watching those. And those here in the auditorium with us, we have a mic, so don't be shy. Okay.
Thanks everyone for being willing to share all your experiences with us today. I have a question that maybe is more around gender roles and the roles in caregiving. So I so appreciate you, Vic, in kind of sharing a man's perspective and being a caregiver. How can we, do you have any thoughts or tips on encouraging, especially men who tend to maybe, as you even said yourself, Vic, tend to think, oh, this is my responsibility, I just have to suck it up and you know, get on with it. What can we do to encourage men to step into that role and be willing to admit and talk about it more? Because I do think as women, we tend to feel comfortable. Maybe it's working moms that talk about daycare challenges and how to manage, but I don't observe men talking about it as much.
Yeah. That's a secret code there, Julie. I'm sorry. That's just us guys. But I do think for us to really move the needle, to break down barriers, I don't want to use a cliche, but men, just me and my wife, I'm not the best communicator. So I may say something very short, but she would say the same thing, and it's like a paragraph. So we're really to the point, but I think we've got to say, in reference to a feeling, not the event, how are you feeling? I think once you get to that piece, the personal aspect will come out, because we will tell you, hey, it's a great day. How are you doing? I'm all right. But no, how are you feeling personally? Are you, within yourself? And so I think that's one piece. I think the other is within the organization, I see we have opportunities where we're connecting more. We have the Yammer pages, internal, folks are doing things in group chats and things like that. As you connect with people, you tend to let your defenses down. And truly they become not just co-workers or associates, then they become friends. Now, as a friend, I can share some stuff because I know it's not going to go anywhere, but you still have that, again, if you don't have someone, and you got to have that one someone in your life where you can share that information, it's going to be a difficult road. Not saying you can pull it out, but someone has got to be attentive to say, hey, that person is really not sharing everything. Let me probe more. And you just don't leave it there. And I think as leaders, we've got to have the courage to keep asking questions. Say, hey, I'm tired of you asking because, yeah, I have a bad day today. Now we can get to the real subject. That's just my 2 cents.
Good question. Others?
Yes, we have a question from the virtual audience here. This person says that they're based in Atlanta. They have aging parents who are in India. And as I provide as much support as possible remotely, does SupportLINC offer help in locating resources and services outside of the U.S.?
Ooh. I mean, it's worth calling to ask. I don't know directly that, but I don't see why, if it's helping you do your job better, then they would, they're there to help you. And I'm sure, it's worth talking to at least, and for sure the topical short-term counseling, they can give you next steps, and they've got a vast database of information that they can pull from. And there's a lot of online resources out there. No matter where you are, there's a lot you can tap into.
Okay. Other questions? That was a good one. We'll have to follow up on that. That's a good one for us to do a little more research on. Okay, we have one in the back.
Hi, thank you guys for being here today. I wanted to ask a question because I know talking about death is something that's very taboo, especially in American culture, but I think it's, ultimately it's something that we all have to confront one way or another. So what do you guys personally do or advise other people to do to confront it early on so it kind of just doesn't, come at you on, a day you don't expect?
We'll let everyone.
Yeah, I have a couple suggestions that are less intimidating. I call these conversations courageous conversations, and there's two resources that give you a script. One of them is called 5wishes.org, and the other one is called the Conversation Project. There might be a nominal fee for the 5wishes.org, but again, to Elizabeth's point, it's not a one and done conversation, but this will give you the ideas, and you could just say, hey, I found this I picked this up at the hospital, or, I heard about this situation where there was this horror story of happened because someone didn't have that in place. And that will allow you to have not only those conversations about the important documents, but also like, what do they want their service to look like, their memorial to look like? I do think that there's something called a death positive movement that's happening because we celebrate birth in our culture, but we don't celebrate death and it's a privilege, frankly, to be with someone in the final stage of their life.
Yeah, 5 Wishes document is amazing because it's an easier entree, and it doesn't just cover the hard stuff, it also covers what music would you like playing? It's things like that make it much more intimate, and it's a great conversation starter.
For me, as I was going through this with my mother-in-law, I think one of the things that we did was, we sat down every day for dinner, but during the dinner conversations, tell me about your favorite moment, and talked about how you want to be remembered. And so we talked about the joy and those things about the 5 wishes. Like, what would you like to have now that you haven't done in a while? Like, I'd like to have steak and lobster. Like, what? Let's get steak and... So we were enjoying, and we talk about a homegoing in our community. So a homegoing celebration. How would you like to be celebrated? Asking about, how would you like? What music? What's your favorite music? So you're getting that list to ensure that their wishes come through while they're still living, right? And I think that conversation is a little bit uncomfortable, but the more you talk about it, the individuals going through that, they'll be okay talking about, how they want to be remembered, and hey, I'm going to miss so-and-so, but it becomes comfortable at some point.
I would just like to touch on this briefly. In my wills, we reference a personal property memorandum, which you can update at any time. Just make sure it's always attached to the will. And it's basically to bequeath items of personal property to specific people. For example, my grandfather's rifle, I want to go to A, my grandmother's china to B. And these can be not depressing conversations, but actually joyful conversations. Mm-hmm. For example, my mother gave me all her mother's china that she got as a wedding trousseau. And I served dinner on it on Sunday. And I have it in advance because that's how she had it written up. And she's bequeathing things as she gets older. And I think it's important to jot these things down because you want to make sure that that ring of your aunts is going to go to the person who you feel would appreciate it.
Any other?
I have one.
Okay.
This is from personal experience. When my father was in the hospital, he broke his hip, which that is sort of, when somebody's older, that's often the first thing that happens. He was in this hospital bed and he said, I want to make a list of people in my life who made a difference to me. And I was like, okay, I don't think we're gonna need it because he was gonna have surgery, but I'll make it, right? So we made the list, and in fact, we did need it. And they were people from throughout his life, and he told me why, each story. And I'd suggest some people, and he was like, nope, not that person. Not kidding. So I was like, okay. So after he died, I got to call, makes me teary, each one of those people and tell them. And that was awesome. I mean, it was really the nicest thing because they made the list, and I told them why, and they were each so touched by that. So that I tell friends of mine now, like if you can have those conversations and you learn more about your older parent or your older adult in that process, brought me a great deal of joy.
I was going to share a story there. My mother-in-law, as she was with cancer and she was getting down pretty bad, we talked. And that was just father-son. I would talk to her. And she said, Victor, what I'm going to do, I'm going to write a letter to you. Don't open it until I pass, but I'm going to write you a letter. And she wrote me a letter. She gave it to me, and I put it away. And that letter became, she wrote one to to my wife, her daughter, the kids, the grandkids. And so when she was suffering with pain going through this, that was kind of blocking the pain out and focusing on the letter. And so when she was done her letters, you can just see a smile on her face, like, okay, I got that out. Mm-hmm. They know exactly what I want them to know. And so, man, that made me feel, and then again, opening the letter, man, just burst out with tears. Mm-hmm. But that was a good point for her.
Great question.
Yeah, great question. Do we have time for, okay.
Yes. Another one from our virtual audience. How do you help someone that thinks they need to do it all, or someone that does do it all, such as a single parent or a child that is an only child of a parent?
Wow.
I think you got to be specific on how you can help. One of the things that caregivers often hear is, let me know how I can help. That's annoying. So, but, and if the caregiver themselves isn't making a list, maybe you suggest a few things. Hey, I'm going to Costco. Can I pick up some things for you? Could I mow your lawn? Or just give me or Victor or whoever a DoorDash so I don't have to make dinner that night. All of those things are super helpful, and many of those can be done from anywhere.
I would say at some point you've got to be okay to raise your hand and say, I do need some help. Yeah. You've got to get to that point. But as you're going through this process, this journey, you've got to realize that, hey, I can't do it all. I can't do it all by myself. Using those resources. And I tell you, one of the things that's from my experience, that testimony, hearing from others who are going through the process as a caregiver, you make that connection. And then you say, okay, I don't want to hear more. I want to learn more. And then hopefully that would help them to say, okay, I'm not in this by myself.
Yeah, and when they tell you, another caregiver tells another caregiver, you really need to do this, you need help. For some reason, their ears are a little more open to receiving that information.
Just like with kids. Hey, I did this with my kid, and this is how we got through this problem. Oh, let me try that. So it's just sharing, knowledge sharing. We're sharing that knowledge, and with knowledge comes power. So now you're, putting things in your tool bag to help you along the way.
Yeah, I think one thing I would say is I think we all have to recognize that this is another facet of life, right? That we all go through or deal with at some point, whether it's childcare, aging parent, temporary illness with one of your children, right? Or if you have kids that are athletes, someone's going to get hurt and it's going to require some extra care, right? And I think we all just have to be in tune and accept and be okay that sometimes I will go into a role of a caregiver, but I need to share that. Right? And so we're hoping people are connecting with, it's okay to share, right? Because I think it's probably a lot more common than one would think. And so I think I've picked up some tips here. It's okay to share, right? And I hope everyone that's listening recognizes that there is probably going to be a facet in your life, if it hasn't already occurred, and that if you're trying to balance and juggle different things in your life, that you have to have that outlet and find someone to share with. So, another question. Do we have any other questions? Okay.
Guys, thank you so much for all of what you've said, really impactful. As a supervisor, I have a question about how do you make sure that your direct reports feel comfortable with bringing these conversations forward? How do you create the right rapport so that you can really have the conversation and try to support them?
I'll let you start, Victor.
Okay. I would say what I've tried to do with my direct reports is over the course of time, we may eat lunch together, like here in the area, and we just have conversations, nothing about work. Let's talk about family. What are you doing on the weekends? How do you spend your off time? And getting to know that individual. That's one, so they feel comfortable. We're not talking about work all the time. And I think the other thing that I've tried to do is when I'm asking about, how are the kids, how are the family, and I'm listening for things like, so-and-so had to go to the doctor. I want to follow up. I make a mental note, not writing it down there, but I make a mental note, okay, Josie went to the doctor last week for something. I got to follow up. Hey, how did the appointment go? So that's letting them know you're very attentive. It's not a conversation where it's coming in one ear, going out the other, because I'm just asking you a question for a conversation. I'm really concerned and I'm really in tune to what you're telling me. So as a leader, as those conversations happen, the employee on the open door policy maybe feel more open to share things in greater detail in reference to that event, Victor, with Joshua. Really, he had a broken bone and we experienced some really heartaches, me and my wife. So now you're really getting to the crust of, okay, now how is things going with the family now that this happened? And so now you continue to have those conversations. So I try to do that with each of my directs. When you got a lot of directs, it's difficult, but try to have that one-on-one, just like with your kids. You want to have that one-on-one time, just you and them, nobody else, so they can talk freely. And if you have to do that away from the building, away from work, so be it. And I've called on a Saturday, hey, I saw you sent the email, how you doing? And just have that conversation to kind of really get like I said, if you notice some different behaviors, we've got to have the courage to ask that uncomfortable question. And that's kind of my point of view on that. But as leaders, we've got to make the first step.
Yeah, and my advice would be, as a leader, take time to build a relationship with your team. And it could just be small things of, when you have your one-on-one, start with, so how are you doing? Right, everything doesn't, the meetings don't have to start all about what's happening at work. I can recall a conversation with one of my team members 2 weeks ago. We were 45 minutes into the conversation and I said, we talked about everything but work. And he said to me, but it's good to do that sometimes. I just needed this time. So you never know what's going on behind the scenes, you know, with team members. So I would just say, as a leader, don't be afraid to spend that extra time to get to know your team members so that you can pick up on some of those signals. But it's hard because, you know, they're different people who think very differently about things, and they tend to be private individuals. And as a leader, that's also kind of, you have to walk that fine line of, hey, they really want to keep that private, but somehow you're trying to build an avenue so that they feel comfortable talking to you. So it's a fine line you have to walk sometimes, but I would say finding time to develop a relationship. And one thing I think we've been disadvantaged with COVID, and I can say this because I took a new role right in the middle of the pandemic. I was 1 week on the floor and everybody sheltered in place. I thought, oh, this is great. How am I going to meet the new team? It's all going to be virtual. But as people have slowly started to come back, what a difference it makes in building a team environment, you know, and we're just in the break room, sitting down to have lunch and starting to build connections and relationships. So I think COVID has probably impacted us in that way, from a supervisor to employee and building relationships. So just getting back in the building and being able to have those casual conversations or those incidental water cooler, right? They help for things like this, where people feel comfortable, because we spend so much time here and we all want to perform well, right? No one wakes up and says, I'm going to work not to do my best, right? But there are things that could impact us from doing our best, and having an environment for people to know that it's okay to let someone know, I'm dealing with something else, but I still want to do my best. And I think we're all accountable in helping build that environment. Other questions? Do we have time?
We do have one more.
Okay.
What avenues can you take if your parents have not granted either power of attorney or medical power of attorney and the decisions they are making?
Oh, wow. Well, we'll let Gina have that one.
That is a tough one. It depends upon what stage they're in, and I should have touched on this with the advance directive. But if your parent is living in squalor, has dementia, not paying bills, et cetera, and is just not listening to your advice as to what they need to do, they need to go into a nursing home. The only way to force that issue, it cannot be through an advance directive. One of my clients thought that they had that power, and I said, no, you don't. You have to file a petition in probate court for you to be appointed that person's guardian. And if the judge accepts the petition, and there's testimony from doctors, other witnesses, et cetera, then you as the petitioner become the parent, and your parent becomes the child, and they must do as you say. But that's an extreme measure, and it's hard to force people to fill out those powers of attorney and advance directive. I've seen it on both sides of the fence, but that's the only legal way for you to force an issue.
Maybe suggest if they're open to go visit an elder law attorney or an estate plan, and then I think maybe someone like yourself or someone in that professional opinion would kind of guide it. And sometimes I think those conversations happen easier with a third party versus, you know, in the family.
And I think the other thing is sometimes to make it about you and not about them. to give you peace of mind, because you're worried and you want to know that they're going to have their wishes the way they want it to be. And if you make it less about them and more about you, sometimes it helps.
Okay. Did we have any more questions? Because I believe we're coming close to the end of the hour. Okay. Well, I certainly want to thank all of our panelists for sharing some of their personal insights today. Hopefully everyone found it as beneficial as I did. This has been a great conversation. And I hope that people are walking away thinking differently now of, hey, what can I do, or where can I get the extra help as a caregiver? I want to encourage all of our employees to share your needs with your supervisor. I'm sure you will be delighted to hear, how can I help and what do you need? Supervisors are here to help, okay? We have a resource page that I'd like you guys to check out. It's on the Starting the Conversations tab on our internet page. And there are links there to SUPPORTLINC and direct links to Anthem, where you can get more help for caregiver services. As a reminder, you know Georgia Pacific truly believes that our greatest strengths are our people. And we are committed to helping our employees navigate tough times. And in closing, I'd like to thank everyone for their time today. But before we all leave, there is one last short video that I'd like to share. And so if everybody can take a look and hear from Kathleen Muldoon.
My name is Kathleen Muldoon. I am a medical school professor, and I have 3 kids. My middle child, Gideon, is medically complex. His total number of diagnoses is now 36. He has 17 or 18 specialists. And so trying to navigate all of that with our own schedules, there's a lot to manage. Being a caregiver, it's physical, it's emotional, it can be draining, all the while is being so worth it. In order to be the best version of yourself, you have to figure out what gives you that energy. The role of a supervisor is to support you. And I've always been very open about my family life and what I need. It's no longer true that each of us needs to drop our personal life at the door of your workplace. You know, that's never been more true than with COVID, when our workplace was brought into our home spaces. Just being very upfront about what you need is always the best policy. Because guess what? People want you in the workplace, and you bring a unique gift to your workplace because of who you are and because of all the different hats that you wear.